Today we talk about one of the greatest fears everyone has in fertility: mix-ups.
I'm Dr. Mark Amols, and this is Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.
Although very rare, every once in a while, a story will break about IVF baby going home with the wrong family. So today, we're going to talk about how rare that is and how clinics actually prevent it from happening, and how science can now prove those embryos are yours. So let's be honest. For an IVF patient, getting the wrong embryo is probably the greatest fear there can be. Not will it work, but is it mine? When you hear about an embryo mix-up, it hits you emotionally because this isn't just a lab error, it's someone's child. And here's the good news. These events are extremely rare. We're talking 1 to 2 per million cycles. That's not common. That's a medical unicorn. To give you an idea of those type of risk, the chances of getting struck by lightning is 30 times higher. The chances of dying in a car crash in your lifetime is 10,000 times higher. Even the chances of dying in a plane crash in your lifetime is about 2 to 3 times higher. This is how extremely rare these mistakes are. Now, don't get me wrong, they shouldn't happen. And what we're going to talk about is, why do they not happen? Why is it so safe? One of the reasons this is such a rare phenomenon is because there are multiple safeguards that are occurring to prevent this. And when something like this happens, it isn't like one safeguard fails, it's multiple safeguards that fail at once. Any good lab should always have a double witness. Some of the things we do even have triple witnesses. This means that 2 people verify that step, that is the correct patient and the correct embryo. Even before the process starts, one of the first things that happens is they go and they make the dishes and they verify the names. Then before even starting the retrieval, they verify the patient, they walk in the room, and the patient verifies themselves, and 2 people verify that that is the patient. Now, during the retrieval, only that patient's eggs are being worked on by that embryologist. And the eggs are put in a dish that was already labeled by that patient, that was already verified by 2 people that it was the correct patient. Now, during the egg retrieval, the sperm is being processed. At that point, when the sperm is given, labels are made ahead of time, then the patient will give the sample, hand it over to the andrologist, and then the andrologist will either check some type of ID and then verify with the person that the sample is theirs. That goes into the container that already has their label, and then is processed. Some labs will even use color coding, so that way if they have more than one patient, they will have different colors to help them know this person always stays blue, this person always stays green. One thing that clinics do to help for safety is they stagger patients. So instead of 2 people giving a sample, only one person is given a sample, let's say every 30 minutes. This allows the andrologist then to work on one sample at a time, and different people are at different steps. So when one person is in the centrifuge, the other one might be in a part where they're processing it in a different way. However, just like in the IVF lab, every step is verified. And it's not just verified, it's documented. One interesting thing is some methods, such as the Zymod chip, allow the sample to never move from where it was processed because it's just one step. You put the sperm on the chip, and then at that point, the sample is removed from the chip, so it never actually moves anywhere. This keeps the chain of custody very minimal. Now, after the retrieval, what happens is, again, the petri dish with the patient's name on it is then put in the incubator, which also usually has the patient's name on it. Now, in the past, most clinics used to have these large incubators where multiple embryos would be inside the incubator. Today, most clinics are going to bedside incubators, which are very small, and usually have individual chambers. Now, at our clinic, every single patient gets their own chamber. No patients share a chamber. Now, it doesn't make it wrong if they do, but it's just important to understand that as time has progressed and the technology has got better, it does make it a bit safer when you can take an embryo from a station where only that patient's at, versus in the past with the large incubators, you'd have to find the person in a bunch petri dishes and make sure you have the right one. The checks are still the same. Still, 2 people should verify it, regardless if they have their own incubator. But like a lot of things I'm going to talk in this podcast, there are things that help. But just because they don't do it doesn't make it unsafe. The next day, when they check for fertilization, again, they'll verify the incubator, take out the petri dish, verify fertilization, and then put it back. This whole time, it's being verified again by 2 people. Now, some clinics here may just have the embryos grow out to day 5 and never check the embryos again. Some may take it out on day 3, and again, the same thing is going to happen. It's going to be verified by at least 2 people. Every step of the way, all of this is being documented. And it's not just the embryos are being verified. Every order is also being verified. Now, eventually, either the embryo is going to be transferred or it's going to be frozen. Now, most programs are going to be freezing at this point. And so what happens again is 2 people verify. Special stickers are made to put on the devices for freezing, which are also verified having the patient's name, date of birth, and the cycle date and the embryo number. Then this frozen straw is then put in a tank with a canister number, usually has a tab color on it, and sometimes even the straw has its own color. All these things are put there to help identify in the future when they go to get this straw. Everything down to the media is documented, even to the lot number. Now, eventually, you're going to do a transfer. And if it's a frozen embryo transfer, then there's a lot of steps that need to happen. First, you're going to have at least 2 witnesses verifying the physician order, that the order is correct. Then you're going to have 2 people verifying that the straw was picked is the correct straw. Then you're going to verify that the straw and the dish match each other, which you then are thawing the embryo into. Then you're going to verify the patient name and the straw once the patient's in the room. And then at our clinic, again, as they come into the room, they'll verify again one more time with the patient, saying it out loud, which embryo and to which patient is being transferred. Even when the patient comes in the room, we verify the patient with both a medical assistant or nurse as well as the embryologist. And then again, before even bringing the embryo in the room, another check is done verifying the correct dish and patient. So as you can see, at every step, identity is checked. So for a mix-up to occur, several people, several systems, and several moments have to all fail at the same time. So what is the reason for failure then? Well, because we're humans, and humans sometimes can make mistakes. If you look at something 1,000 times, eventually sometimes you might just misread something because you're human. This is the reason for the second check. And yes, if someone doesn't do that second check, you can see how something could go wrong. If someone doesn't recognize that the straw color was wrong because there wasn't a second check, something can go wrong. But as I mentioned, it is extremely rare. There's been about 25 recorded cases of this in about 12 million live births from IVF. So as you can see, it's a very small number, 1 to 2 per million. And as I mentioned, things are getting even better because with time, there's a lot of stuff that has happened that's improved it. For example, labeling has got easier. Instead of handwritten labels, now people can use special stickers that go on them that are easier to read. There's new things such as electronic witnessing, which we'll go into a few minutes here, and also DNA testing. You can actually now test the embryos to make sure the embryo matches your DNA fingerprint. Now, in the end, still nothing is perfect. Certain companies that do allow for identification of DNA testing are going to be like iGenomics, Cooper Genomics, Luminary Genetics, Genomic Predictions, and several other PGT companies. Now, keep in mind, parental origin usually does cost extra money, but for some people, it may be worth it. Now, I mentioned a minute ago about electronic witnessing. So as I mentioned, human witnessing is the gold standard. Every clinic should have 2 embryologists verify every step. This should have no exceptions. Electronic witnessing is kind of like having another person verify. Now, there's different types out there. There's barcode systems, There's RI witnessing, which uses RFID tags, and then there's AI. Now with barcodes, just like you would think, every single dish has a barcode. They click it and it just verifies that that's the correct patient. The same thing with RFID tags. What it does is it has a little tag on it, and as it gets close to the center, it verifies that's the right patient, and then the person verifies, yep, that's the correct patient. Now, AI is very early and still in the experimental stages, but basically it's watching and monitoring and looking for pattern recognitions and seeing if anything is going wrong. So if it sees someone, let's say, take a dish and then doesn't put the dish back and use it again, it would say something. But again, this is extremely new. It's not really being used anywhere as a major form to prevent mix-ups. Now, if your lab's not using electronic witnessing, don't be worried. It's still new, it's not the standard of care, and I don't think a lab would be bad for not using it. But I do believe it's going to be the future of fertility, and I eventually think when we can figure out what's the best one and which one's going to have the best utility, it will become an eventual standard. The problem still lies in humans. If you label the dish wrong, it doesn't matter how many times you put a barcode and you check it, it's always going to check correct, even though you put the wrong sticker on it, which would then have the wrong patient. This is why 2 embryologists verifying every step is always important. Now, here's the truth about witnessing systems. They're very new to medicine, and they're becoming more common. But the thing is, we just talked about that the error rate is so low that's going to take time to even find out if these are really benefiting. Personally, they worry me at times because as humans, when we rely on other systems, we sometimes get a little bit lazy and don't verify our own because we think, oh, the system's going to catch us. And that's something that can never happen. As I mentioned, humans always need to verify it, and it always needs to be a double verification, if not even a triple verification in certain situations. At our clinic, anytime we do a PGT-M case, which is for a monogenetic disorder, we always have 3 people verify the embryo that's being selected. And this is because it's a high-stakes situation. Putting back the wrong embryo not only can cause the pregnancy to maybe not work, but it could potentially give a baby some disease. And so in that situation, the risk is higher, and we add another verification. So in the end, if a patient doesn't have electronic witnessing, it doesn't make them a bad clinic. A clinic is not unsafe just because it doesn't have that. But what they have to have, and would make them unsafe, if they don't have strong double witnessing, if they don't have good labeling, or they don't audit things, or they don't have really a culture of safety. I anticipate in the next 10 years, we're probably going to see it very common to have both double checks as well as electronic witnessing systems. And I anticipate it's going to be a hybrid. I don't think one's going to win. I think eventually it's going to be something like AI and barcodes or AI and RFID. So the point is, the goal of this podcast was to help reassure you that the chances of something happening are very small, even though you just heard about it in the news recently. Now, there are exceptions to this rule sometimes. For example, in InfoCell, we call IVC, the patient is always its own incubator. So there's actually 0 risk of a mix-up because what happens in IVC is the patient goes through a retrieval, only that patient's being worked on, the eggs and sperm are all put together at the exact same time, put back into the patient, where she will then culture it in the InfoCell pod. Then she comes back in 5 days, the pod is opened, the embryos are taken out and transferred into her. So the embryos actually never leave her custody in that way. So there are some clinics that do have just one embryologist, but because they're only working on one patient at a time, and because the sperm and egg never come in contact with another sperm and egg because there's never another patient and goes back into the patient before another patient comes in the room, there actually is no chance of a mix-up because there's only one patient in the building at a time. If you're not familiar with IVC, that will be a future podcast. I did think it was important to at least bring up because there are some clinics that only have one embryologist in that situation, but they really don't need 2 because there cannot be a mix-up since there is never another patient. The goal of this podcast was purely to help reassure you. If you ask me, is it possible? Yes. I'm never going to tell someone there is 0 risk, but what I can tell you is that we tried to make it near 0, and it technically is near 0. As I mentioned in the beginning, the chances of this actually happening, of a mix-up embryo, is about 1 to 2 per million. And I'm not even talking about cycles, 1 to 2 per million births from IVF. That means dying in surgery is 1,000 times riskier than an IVF mix-up. That means getting struck by lightning in your lifetime is 50 times more likely. And the most shocking of them is that your lifetime risk of dying in an airplane crash is at least double the risk of an IVF mix-up. Just like you, we want that number to be 0, but it's pretty close. And although no one can ever say there's a 0 chance of a mix-up, what we can tell you is we do a lot of things to help prevent it, and you should feel overall reassured. Hopefully this podcast helped reassure you. I probably didn't cover every little thing, but I tried to cover most of the stuff so people can understand just how rigorous the checking is. I can assure you that it is one of the most important things in the lab. If we ever have an embryologist or someone who doesn't have the skill set to constantly keep checking these things, we wouldn't keep them. No one would. This is probably the most important thing when it comes to an embryologist is verification. And hopefully I was able to explain that today well enough that you feel more reassured that your embryo is your embryo. And like we talked about, there are several things you can do, such as even testing embryo for paternal genetics, if that helps you even more. Just like we're more improved today than we were 10 to 15 years ago, I expect the next 10 to 15 years, it will even get better. It will never be 0, but it's going to even get closer and closer to 0. If this podcast was helpful for you today, or maybe you know a friend who's going through IVF and is worried about these things, let them know about this episode. It might help relieve some of their fears. As always, if you like this podcast, give us a 5-star review on your favorite medium, tell your friends about us, and most of all, keep coming back. I look forward to talking to you again next week on Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.